What's good, everyone? Anderson Emerald here to talk about a few different stories that have come up over the past week as it relates to athletes, Grand Slam track, all kinds of things, just to be able to fit things in and share my opinion about some of these different things that have popped up. Now, I'm going to talk about four different things in general. Fred Kerley and his whereabouts suspension, Kishane Thompson pulling out of the next couple Diamond Leagues, also Shericka Jackson a little bit, Julien Alfred and also her pulling out of some Diamond Leagues, and of course Grand Slam track and some of the issues that they've been facing. So go to the timestamps below. You can skip forward to whichever part you want. There'll be some interwoven stories in here as well, but let's start off with Fred Kerley and his provisional suspension. So just a few days ago, it was announced that Fred Kerley was provisionally suspended for whereabouts failures. And, we know Fred Kerley as the 2022 world champion. He's the Olympic silver medalist from 2021 and the bronze medalist from 2024. He's run 9.76 seconds. He's run 9.7 a bunch of times in his career. So he is one of the most accomplished sprinters in track and field, especially in his current era. And that's not even to say of his bronze medal in the 400 from 2019. So check out, I'll leave a link in the article to Citius Mag where Chris Chavez kind of broke down all the kind of issues that Fred Kerley has faced in 2025. I'm not going to get into all of that. The thing that I specifically want to dive into is some of the challenges that arise when it comes to whereabouts suspensions and I guess suspensions in general with track and field, where first off, there's so many different kinds of suspensions that athletes face in the sport. So Fred Kerley, in this case, is provisionally suspended for whereabouts failures. And that means that he wasn't where he said he would be or where he was supposed to be to get tested appropriately. If you miss 3 whereabouts tests in a single year, you're eventually going to be suspended for, I think it's 2 years. But there's so many different types of suspensions, like taking steroids or taking stimulants or tampering or different things like that. And some fans in our sport do a pretty bad job of differentiating between the types of suspensions, which to a degree is very fair. But this then flows over into the general public who knows nothing about our sport, right? And they assume absolutely anybody is cheating. Now, again, I want to be clear that it sometimes is fair for fans to, not differentiate between the different suspensions because everything does come back to the idea that, AIU, WADA, whoever, USADA, like they're trying to catch cheaters. So missing tests and whereabouts, it's not new, but it does unfortunately get blurred when you start to see athletes who are actually suspended, again, in the case of Fred Kerley. But I do think it's very important for us to acknowledge the differences between the varying levels of suspensions that occur for athletes in our sport. For example, Gabby Thomas, Toby Amisan, they had whereabouts failures. They were eventually lifted, but they had whereabouts failures and at one point were provisionally suspended. Christian Coleman and Saweed Nasser, they were eventually banned for whereabouts failures. Shelly-Ann Fraser-Pryce, she was banned for taking, I think, oxycodone in some, something to help her toothache back in 2010. You have Johan Blake and Linford Christie. They were banned for stimulants. You have Veronica Campbell-Brown and Asafa Powell. They were banned for various different things. You have LaShawn Merritt. You have Tyson Gay, Justin Gatlin, Marion Jones, Tim Montgomery, Ben Johnson. All these athletes kind of fall on a spectrum of why they were either provisionally suspended, eventually suspended, banned, whatever it may be. But I think most of y'all watching can probably differentiate between Ben Johnson and Marion Jones, as well as Shelly-Ann Fraser-Pryce and Gabby Thomas or Christian Coleman, right? Like those all are going to be different cases, but the nuance unfortunately isn't there. But again, that's just my opinion. The other thing that's here that unfortunately is a stat is that however many guys on the men's 100-meter all-time list have served suspensions in some capacity outside of Usain Bolt and Kishane Thompson and Maurice Green and Trayvon Bromell, right? So many guys in between them have actually served suspensions. Johan Blake, Tyson Gay, Justin Gatlin, Asafa Powell, now Fred Kerley, Christian Coleman, right? It's unfortunate that it looks like that, but that's why I personally think it's important for us to communicate as best as possible because Fred Kerley's suspension is not the same as Johan Blake's, which is not the same as Justin Gatlin's, right? Or Tyson Gay. So those things, it's important, but it is part of the sport. Let's move on. Kishane Thompson pulling out of the Lausanne Diamond League. Now, I spoke about this in my Lausanne preview where he noted a little bit of shin discomfort. So he pulled out of the remaining Diamond Leagues from the year to prepare for World Champs. Shericka Jackson also pulled out of, the Lausanne Diamond League. I don't know if she pulled out of the remaining Diamond Leagues, but she gave no explanation. So we haven't heard anything on that end. But there's 3 things that I want to speak about as it relates to Kishane Thompson and Shericka Jackson. First off, as I said in my Lausanne preview, I'm okay with athletes pulling out last minute if it's for, these slight injuries or if they communicate whatever the reason may be. In this case, it's an injury, but it could be something else, right? Our sport is about the big meets. It's about the World Championships like we have this year, or the Olympic Games like last year or in 2028. And, like it or not, that is the focus. Many of the meets throughout the year are simply not going to be as important as the one meet that's going to determine things like your contract negotiations, going to determine things like the accolades, the sponsorships, like all kinds of other things. That's what the World Championships and the Olympic Games are about. And that's what athletes need to prepare for. If Kishane Thompson ran the Lausanne Diamond League versus Oblique Seville and Noah Lyles, and then he eventually got injured in that race, people would probably be saying the opposite of like, oh, he should have just pulled out. He shouldn't have risked it. He shouldn't have been running so often. That's what the narrative would have been. And we would have got to the World Champs, looked back, not seen Kishane there, and been like, oh, imagine the race that could have been if we saw Kishane and Noah lined up side by side, right? So that's why I give a lot of grace for an athlete who comes out and says that they have some sort of injury and they're pulling out as a precaution to make sure that they're ready for whatever meet is coming down the line. Also, think about it. Noah Lyles, he was out for the majority of the 2025 season. And yes, a lot of people were coming at him for not racing, for not knowing where he's at, all these kinds of things. But guess what? He took the time off to prepare for what actually matters, and that is preparing for the World Championships. He's now healthy. He's now racing very frequently, but people kind of came at him when he wasn't racing in the year. But we're not going to remember that. We're going to remember when he gets, to the World Championships and gets, whether it's a gold medal, silver, bronze, or whatever, right? That's what we're actually going to remember. Look at what happened with Kenny Bednarek. He pulled out of the Prefontaine Classic in a matchup with, let's see, Le Toboho in the 200 because of some discomfort that he felt. But guess what? He was preparing for the USA Championships, which was the one, meet that mattered because he needed that to qualify for the World Champs. So just something to keep in mind as it relates to Kishane Thompson pulling out of Lausanne with some slight discomfort. Now, second, athletes not giving a reason as to why they pull out of meet completely complicates things. And in this case, I'm talking about Shericka Jackson, where Kishane, at least it was noted that he had some discomfort in his shins, so he pulled out of Lausanne. But we don't know why Shericka Jackson pulled out of Lausanne and, potentially some subsequent meets as well. We have no idea. And that leads the public, fans, media, whoever, to actually speculate as to what actually occurred, especially when talking about Shericka coming off what happened last year. We'll talk about that in a second. But giving some kind of update is just very helpful for the public to better understand and set better expectations, to not have people go with wild theories about an athlete being completely injured and completely out. Like, that's what is going to be the narrative if information isn't actually given to the public. But also, we have to acknowledge the way our sport is set up, athletes are just under no obligation to actually say anything, whether that is about an injury, whether that is about something that came up, or whatever it may be. There's no obligation. So it does, feed into the idea that people can then just speculate about whatever. But the third and final thing as it relates to Kishane and Shericka is the kind of like negative impression that 2024 has left on fans as we look now at this situation of specifically Shericka pulling out of the meet. Steven Francis is one of the greatest coaches in history, undoubtedly. Like, considering every athlete that he's coached, it's impossible to say he is not one of the best. But last year, considering what happened with Shericka, left the track and field world confused at best in terms of the events that played out. Now, Shericka in 2024, she had a very slow start to her season, but she eventually did qualify for the Olympic Games in both the 100 and the 200 at Jamaican Trials. But when the timeline started to unfold, it was like, what is going on? On July 9th, Shericka pulled up in the Hungary Continental Tour meeting in the 200, grimace on her face and everything, and it looked bad. July 30th, a few days before the start of the Olympic Games, Steven Francis came out and said that Shericka Jackson is 100% healthy. Those words, 100% healthy, on July 30th. The next day, on July 31st, Shericka Jackson is at the Puma House in Paris, and she announces that she's pulling out of the 100 meters at the Olympic Games. Her explanation was that she was going to focus on the 200. Then, just a few days later, on August 4th, Shericka Jackson pulls out of the Paris 200 meters. So she no longer is competing at the Olympic Games. Remember, one day before she pulled out of the 100 meters, her coach said she is 100% healthy. So going from 100% healthy to not running a single race at the Olympic Games, and an Olympics that she had been dreaming of, knowing what happened at the Tokyo Olympics, like, that is what brings some confusion to the fans and to the public. So that's why when I look at a situation like this, I can understand why people may question the decisions or question the reasons as to why someone like Shericka is pulling out of a meet without any explanation. Again, yes, she didn't get injured in a race, so we haven't seen her pull up or anything like that, but we have to understand the context of what occurred last year and what was communicated to us as fans, but then what actually did play out on the track. That's why being honest about an injury or something small may be very helpful for us as fans, as media, as whoever, to have a better understanding and not run with wild theories and to have people arguing, with, many of y'all in the comments who are like, no, trust MVPs, trust Steven Francis. Like, yes, we can trust them, but also understand the other side as to why some people can't trust them. All right, just want to make sure that's very clear. Now, connecting with injuries, let's move on, talk about Julien Alfred. Julien was scheduled to run at the Celestia Diamond League and the Lausanne Diamond League, but she pulled out of them initially reported due to some injury. It was later noted that she was not injured and she was just working on things. It was later noted, or I guess around the same time, by the Lausanne Diamond League that she was actually injured. Later, the St. Lucia Times apparently quoted her saying that no, she's actually just working on things in preparation for her last few races. And then later, during the Celestia Diamond League 200, in the broadcast, it said that she had a hamstring injury.
By Julien Alfred, who's the Olympic champion at 100, who's harboring a hamstring injury at the moment, Alfred.
This is a kind of problem with our sport that I was noting a little bit earlier, where information is almost like communicated by telephone, right? That literally the game of telephone, where we get something from the athlete, maybe the team, it's communicated to the meet or to a journalist. They say something that's maybe slightly different, which is then taken and slightly miscued. But we can kind of see the disconnect between what's reported and what's actually happening. And unfortunately, it seems like, I guess we don't actually know what's clearly happening. Again, Julien Alfred in the St. Lucia Times said that she's just working on things, so we can probably believe that. But then it gets confusing when the meet, multiple meets, whether it's Lausanne and Celestia, they're saying that she's actually injured, and they get specific and say a hamstring injury. It's like, what is actually going on? This is why if an athlete came out explicitly and said, what may be going on, that would be helpful. Again, in our sport, athletes are not required to do that in any capacity, but I think we can understand how it does bring some confusion to the landscape of what fans and people are actually watching and trying to follow along with. Now, similar to Kishane Thompson, for Julien Alfred, I actually think this is smart. If she's actually dealing with things, if she needs time to work on things, take the time off, because the goal is the World Championships. She wants to get a gold medal in the 100, gold medal in the 200, and she's been having a very good season. Take the time off and focus on that. We're not going to miss a race in Lausanne or Poland. Unfortunately, that's not what we're going to remember. We're going to remember the World Championship final, where she's going head to head with Melissa Jefferson Woodin. That's what we actually want to see. So who knows? We'll see. And she also didn't say that she pulled out of the Diamond League final, so we may still see Julien Alfred in Zurich. So keep a lookout for that. Also, quick note that Rhasidat Adeleke from Ireland, she noted that she's out for the year from injury. She's ending her 2025 season. So this kind of makes it where Julien Alfred, as a professional in her group under Coach Flo, is like on her own in a sense, where Rhasidat, she's now injured and out for the year. Dinasha Smith, she left Coach Flo and that now is back in London training. And now you also, I guess we don't have any idea about Lene Tava-Thomas and Kevona Davis from Jamaica, who were previously training with Coach Flo in Texas. So who knows, but just something to keep in mind there. Now, finally, let's talk about Grand Slam Track. Grand Slam Track recently put out a statement, from Michael Johnson, saying that they have missed the deadline to pay athletes with kind of the payment plan that they have set up. A lot of the information in this, statement was really Michael Johnson spoke about in the Ready, Set, Go podcast. I really do encourage you to check out that full podcast interview. It goes a lot more in depth than just the 3-page thing that we got on Twitter and Instagram or whatever. But this thing they posted really wasn't much new information. It's just confirming what we already knew, right? It's good that Michael Johnson is being more transparent, but it's just not new information. Really, what's not good, and again, I encourage you to watch the Ready, Set, Go podcast, that full interview. What's not good is that the sponsor pulled out mid-season, and really pulled out, I think in April is what they said. So before, I think 2 meets had gone down, before Miami and before Philly. So it was kind of like information that was known internally, at least by Michael Johnson, but it wasn't communicated, or they continued on the rest of the season knowing that they didn't have the funds at the time. I understand that they were hoping that things would be addressed, whether that investor would be able to, get the funds back and recommit the funds, or they'd be able to get another investor during that time period. But regardless, it really is a terrible, terrible look for Grand Slam track to have, this occur literally mid-season and no one actually knowing. And what this statement and all these kind of recent comments say to me is it just feels like Grand Slam track won't return in 2026, at least not in the form that we saw it in 2025. Maybe like a drastically toned down version of a meet. Like we see a one meet, one or two meets, like some small individual situations, as opposed to like the literally Grand Slam track situations that we saw in 2025. But we have to be honest, like they set the standard for what Grand Slam track is supposed to look and feel like, right? You can't then take things away, or at least initially when you take things away, people aren't going to feel the same about it. It may take years for them to rebuild to what they had or what they were showcasing in 2025. But if they come back in 2026 and it's a drastically scaled down version, it's not going to be like, okay, this is Grand Slam track. It's almost like, I don't know if this analogy works, but with Mercedes-Benz, you have, I think it's W16, you have a Formula One car. You can have that, and that's what you give someone to start off. But then the next year, you take that away and you give them like a small A-class Mercedes-Benz. Yeah, sure, it's still a Mercedes-Benz, but it's like, it's not the same thing that I was given up front. So that's what they're gonna have to work out if they do return in 2026. The big thing here, though, is that the athletes' trust is lost, where a lot of athletes have vocally come out and said that they need to get paid. They want to get paid. It's like, what's going on? And I guess this is still just the Kingston money. I don't know, but it is what it is. They'll have to do a crazy amount of work to reestablish trust with, of course, the athletes who we want to specifically see. And I say that in the sense that it's like the best athletes in the world. Gabby Thomas, Sydney McLaughlin-Levrone, Grant Fisher. Like, these are the best of the best who put themselves on the line, obviously expecting that they would get paid, whether it's the prize money, whether it's their contract, right? Those signed racers, we're not even talking about that aspect, right? We're just talking about prize money, appearance, like whatever. So that's what they're really gonna have to do, reestablish that trust. And the other thing is it's gonna make us just like focus a lot on money in sports, more so than we already have. I know many people already have, but just in general, this has made people think about money in sports a lot more, where for Grand Slam track, you had stars, stories, and stakes. And those stakes essentially was the money. That's what they were, really touting. That's what they were really communicating in terms of, all right, you're making 100K, you're making this and that. Like, that's what they were really touting. And that allowed or kind of pushed other initiatives in track and field to up the amount of money that they were paying. Whether that's the Diamond League, whether that's the World Ultimate Challenge that they'll have next year, whether that's Athlos, right? All these different things started to increase the amount of pay, potentially because of Grand Slam track. Will those entities actually stick with it in the future? I'll talk about Athlos in 1 second, but that's something to take into consideration because that was the selling point for Grand Slam. We're paying the athletes fairly. I think we all want something like Grand Slam or a track league or just something to kind of like shake up the track world and bring a new initiative and some new, energy into the track and field world. Again, we'll talk about Athlos in 1 second, but it's unfortunate that this didn't work out specifically because Michael Johnson was the head of Grand Slam track, because he is someone within our sport. He is a world record holder. He is a multiple time gold medalist, former world record holder, one of the best in the 90s and whatever. Like, all those things made Michael Johnson who he is today, which eventually gave him a lot of cachet in the track and field world. Now, I know a lot of people have a lot of, mixed feelings about Michael Johnson even before Grand Slam track, but there's no denying that he was a legend. So because he was part of our sport, it made Grand Slam track's failure this year a really, really big blow internally in track and field in various different ways. But let's be honest, it's nothing new. There's been many initiatives that have come into track and field, and maybe not on this massive grand scale, but they've been touting themselves as, we're going to bring something new to the sport. In 2018, you had the Athletics World Cup. It wasn't like a Grand Slam track that was just a one-off meet that had points, whatever, but it have only lasted one meet, literally only one meet 1 year. Back in the 1970s, you had the International Track Association. That was something completely brand new. It only lasted, I think, 4 years, 1972 to 1976. So that was something. But again, Grand Slam track, because it was so big and so grand, and because Michael Johnson was in our sport, it kind of hit really, really hard, and it failed in 2025 really, really tough. And, the community is really, really taking it to it. But I think now eyes are going to shift a little bit over to Athlos. Why? They had one meet last year. They're going to have another meet this year in the fall, and they're now going to have a league in 2026. I think this is very, very exciting, and it'll be a great addition to track and field, but eyes are going to be on the money. Eyes are going to be on the structure. Eyes are going to be on the implementation of Athlos and their league and everything that they're going to be doing. Will it be able to bring in money? I mean, they're doing the long jump competition in Times Square this year. Is that going to be able to generate money? Is that going to be profitable? Maybe. I don't know. But there's a big difference where Grand Slam track was, spearheaded by Michael Johnson, who's in the sport, and then he got all these different investors. Athlos is kind of spearheaded by a very, very rich man. We just have to be honest. Alexis Ohanian is a rich, rich man. Like, he made money in a ton of different ways. He's pouring a lot of money into this initiative, and he's not from track and field. So if things don't work out over the next year or 2 years or whatever it is, it will be a semi-big blow, but it won't be as big of a hit because Alexis is not from the track and field world. And it's also kind of, I guess it's not necessarily clear on, like, is Alexis just investing all of his money into Athlos, or is this like a thing with like investors that we just aren't, privy to? Who knows? But it's, differences there of Alexis coming into the sport as opposed to quote unquote one of our own within the sport building something up, and it unfortunately not going the way that we wanted. Again, I personally do hope it works out and grows and continues to build. It's a really, really great and really, really interesting concept for, Athlos to have a league, but I think the track world is going to be watching with a bit of different eyes as the years progress, specifically on Athlos and any other initiative that, tries to come in and start something fresh and brand new. But those are just some of the topics. I know I probably spent a little more time than I expected. Definitely let me know what you think about each of them. Go in the comments, share your thoughts. Maybe you completely disagree with my thoughts. Maybe you completely agree. I don't know. But let me know what you think. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. Truly do appreciate y'all. Thanks for watching.